Post the pandemic, we've seen three broad formats of teams emerge. I think there are teams which are being completely remote because they figured that during the pandemic, the completely remote structure worked really well for them. There was no drop in efficiency. In fact, they were able to be more efficient. So companies have decided to go with a permanently remote structure with those teams. Then there are teams which have figured a hybrid model because there are some functions which require to function from office, some functions where there is no drop in productivity when they're working remotely. So they've adopted a hybrid structure which allows for both of these things to happen. In fact, there are times when they say, okay, look, people need to come a certain number of days and work from office. That this allows for better flexibility with the teams as well. And then there are teams which primarily want to work from office because they realize that the completely remote structure or the hybrid structure has not been working for them. But one thing that has been common across all of these different formats has been the drop in social capital that the pandemic has created within these teams. Because pre-pandemic, everyone just knew one specific format of working, which was working where you're engaging with all your colleagues on a regular basis. You have a lot of water cooler conversations. You're able to solve problems just by walking across each table, right? So that entire element has been taken away with this remote structure. So what's happened is folks have joined during the pandemic. They've had little to zero face time with some of their colleagues. So they've just been talking to black screens on Zoom with a lot of their colleagues, right? Which has basically created a lot of these barriers to conversation that which would be very easy otherwise. And that ends up making some of the things which would be fairly simple quite challenging. That ends up also killing productivity because some functions really thrive when there is in-person collaboration. So I think teams have been grappling with these specific challenges which have come up with this drop in social capital. And I think a lot of the work that they've been doing has been towards stemming this erosion. So this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges being faced currently. What we've noticed is when you have a very clear focus on what the team engagement activity is supposed to deliver, right? It allows us to also design the program structure and the activities to cater to those specific focus areas and drive the main purpose of the activity. Because a lot of these activities can build in a whole set of layers, which allows you to really bring out those insights, drive those conversations, which target those specific pain points that the company is dealing with, right? Because there are cases where teams are trying to deal with complex challenges. It could be about managing conflicts. It could be about goal setting related events that they would want to run. It could be about just driving more collaboration cross-functionally within teams, right? So it could be a whole set of different tasks that they would like to solve for. But if you are not very clear with the purpose, the activity cannot be very, it might not be as strongly aligned to the focus area that you're looking at. So just calling that out really helps, and having a clear direction of what you want to do helps. For example, we ran an event recently where there was an organization, a large player in the automotive space. So they had a challenge when people were moving across different teams. So some of the knowledge transfers that was required within the current team was not happening as efficiently as they wanted it to. And when people moved across teams, it left like really big holes within the team. So they wanted an activity which sort of address that specific challenge and help people talk about that challenge and drive insights about how they can do that better. So we designed an activity where we got people, divided them into different teams, and they were working on specific objectives. And then we integrated it with another activity like Squid Games, where people came in, few of the folks from each of those teams were kidnapped and taken into another room, and they were supposed to do something else. But what this brought out was that exact same scenario that teams were grappling with, where the four main folks who were actually driving some of the pieces in the first activity were actually lost suddenly, and their teams hadn't planned for that. And there was not enough sharing of local knowledge that was done, which resulted in these teams struggling a lot. And teams where they actually made that happen were able to be a lot more efficient and get to the goal that they wanted to. So this allowed us to drive those conversations and work towards the exact challenges, right? So it really helps having a clear focus area articulated to us, because we're able to design the program structure to make that work for you. So one of the things that can make a massive difference to the success of employee engagement activities is the level of planning that goes behind it. Because right from the point of building hype towards an activity to creating visibility for those activities, involving the right stakeholders who are going to be part of those activities, deciding what the outcomes of these activities are going to be. If there's enough forethought put into all of this, it allows us to create a really good roadmap for these engagement activities and drive all the outcomes that the team wishes to have as an output of these activities, right? So it's something which teams really need to it should not be an afterthought about, okay, there's a Women's Day coming up, so let's run an activity and plan for this like a week before Women's Day. As long as they have a calendar mapped out, they're able to decide what are the different events they want to really create engagement around, and also just overall, like what are the different stakeholders they want to drive? Like if you're doing activities for leadership teams, the different kinds of activities that will work. What specific outcomes you want to drive for that team? If you're dealing with a team of young engineers, the kind of activities that would work for them would be very different. So it's about really understanding who your stakeholder is going to be, what is the sort of profile you're working with, what activities might work with them, what might not work. Because if you have a bunch of activities that are hit and a miss, at some level, it just creates this thought amongst the different stakeholders that these activities are probably not for us. And this is just one thing we need to check box off, or we may or may not participate, because I think should really be striving towards creating maximum participation for these activities. And I think that level of planning makes a really huge difference in how these things would play out. Thing we've seen that's been working really well in getting people back to the workplace is instead of having like a couple of big bang events where you try and get the best stand-up comedians or drive some large-scale engagement, it's trying to do a lot of more frequent, smaller-scale engagements where you're creating a lot of traction amongst folks. And this is goes back to the earlier point of creating social capital, right? So it creates drives a lot of these conversations with folks because they're coming back to the office. The initiatives which companies have set up, like thank God it's Thursday, so they get everyone in on a Thursday, get together at the pantry, do some fun engagement activities, which specifically are geared towards driving a lot of conversation, familiarizing people, getting to like know people beyond their screen name, right? So this is something which is we've seen work really well, where people do more frequent, smaller engagement activities rather than much larger and less frequent activities. Because especially with teams which are working purely remotely, so we've seen like pre-pandemic, we've been working with the same teams. They used to do like an annual offsite, but now they do like offsites every like quarter maybe, or sometimes they do an engagement activity, rent out some spaces and do these engagement activities more frequently. So this is something that works well. And another thing which we've seen work really well with some teams is where they've set up policies around how virtual conversations happen. It's one of those things where trying to create some processes around what is acceptable and what is not. Obviously, like you can't always mandate a video to be on during a conversation, but just by doing that one simple thing, the level of engagement that you have, the level of quality of conversations that you have, and the level of familiarity you build with your colleague goes up significantly. So unless someone has a very pressing need, like where maybe they're on a bad data connection or they have something else going on in the background, it encouraging people to have their videos on through like some fun gamified activities could be really interesting. There are times when we've seen companies set up interesting background of the day challenges. They have like, okay, share your show us your workspace within your home sort of challenges, right? Just gets people to turn on their cameras more often rather than create this practice of everybody being on a black screen. So this is something which is a very small thing to do, but really has a big impact in terms of familiarity that gets built within teams.